She had a talent for being forgettable. Not in the way that some women were forgettable. The ones who faded into wallpaper at parties, who smiled too wide and laughed too loud, and still somehow left no impression. Audrey Sloane was forgettable, the way a locked door was forgettable. You walked past it 100 times. You never thought to try the handle. She liked it that way. She was 28 years old and had worked the books for Vega Holdings for 3 years. And in those 3 years she had learned 2 things with absolute certainty. The first was that Vega Holdings was not, in any meaningful sense, a holdings company. The second was that knowing this was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She didn't ask questions. She didn't make eye contact with the men in expensive suits who came through the side entrance on Thursday afternoons. She kept her head down, her cardigan on, and her numbers clean, and she told herself that, as long as she was useful, she was safe. She was not the kind of woman men like these looked at twice. Her desk sat at the far end of the administrative floor, tucked behind a row of filing cabinets that nobody used anymore because everything had gone digital 3 years ago. The cabinets were still there because nobody had bothered to move them. Audrey had never bothered to point this out. The cabinets made a wall. Walls were useful. She arrived every morning at 7:45, 15 minutes before anyone else, and she left every evening at 5:59, 1 minute before the security system logged the evening shift change. She ate lunch at her desk. She brought her own coffee in a thermos because the break room made her nervous. Too much open space, too many windows, too many chances for someone to look at her and actually see her. She was very, very good at her job. The numbers never lied to her. People lied, constantly and fluently, but numbers only lied if someone made them. And when someone made them lie, Audrey always found the seam. It was the thing she was best at in the world. Finding the place where something had been forced into a shape it didn't naturally hold. She had found 7 such places in the last quarter alone. She had not told anyone. She had simply corrected them, quietly, in the dark of her private terminal, and then she had gone home to her apartment and her cat, a large orange tabby named Fig, and she had poured herself a glass of wine and not thought about it too hard. This was how Audrey Sloane survived. The man who ran Vega Holdings, who ran, if you believed the rumors, a significant portion of the northeastern seaboard's less documented commerce, was named Emilio Varga. Audrey had seen him exactly 4 times in 3 years. The first time, she had been carrying a stack of quarterly reports to the 19th floor and had stepped out of the elevator directly into his path. He had looked at her the way you looked at a piece of furniture that had been moved slightly to the left, a flicker of assessment, a recalibration, and then nothing. He had stepped around her and continued walking, and 2 of his men had followed, and the doors had closed, and Audrey had stood there in the hallway with her heart going absolutely haywire in her chest. The second time, she had been in the glass-walled conference room running projections for the CFO when he had passed in the corridor outside. He hadn't looked in. The third time, she had been in the parking structure, retrieving her umbrella from her car, because the weather forecast had lied to her again, and she had heard his voice before she saw him, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself, because it had never had reason to doubt it would be obeyed. He had been on a phone call. He had not looked at her. The fourth time was the Thursday afternoon in late October, when she found the account she was never supposed to find. And she made the mistake of staying 90 minutes past her usual departure time to verify what she was seeing. And she looked up from her monitor at 7:28 in the evening to find Emilio Varga standing at the end of the row of filing cabinets, watching her. She had not heard him approach. She did not know how long he had been standing there. He was taller than she remembered, though she wasn't sure why she was thinking about his height at a moment like this. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open at the throat. He had a face that had been arranged by genetics into something severe, Strong jaw, heavy brow, eyes the particular shade of grey that reminded Audrey of lake water in November, cold and very deep and not entirely safe. He was looking at her screen. Every cell in Audrey Sloane's body went perfectly, catastrophically still. "Miss Sloane," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, unhurried. "Mr. Varga." Her own voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "I was just finishing up." He didn't move. His eyes left her screen and came to her face, and she had the sudden, vertiginous sensation of being weighed, measured, and found. Not wanting, exactly, more like found. The way you found something you had misplaced and had been looking for without admitting you were looking. "You've been here late a few times this month," he said. It was not a question. The Meridian file had some irregularities. I wanted to make sure I understood them before the Friday review. And do you? Understand them? She looked at him. She thought about the 7 corrections she had made in silence. She thought about the account she had found tonight, the one that didn't appear anywhere in the official ledgers, the one that was receiving transfers in amounts carefully structured to sit just below the federal reporting threshold. "Not entirely," she said. It was not a lie. It was a very precise truth. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening. Emilio Varga did not look like a man who softened, but a change in the quality of his attention, the way light changed when the angle shifted. "Go home, Miss Sloane," he said. She saved her work, shut down her terminal, gathered her bag and her thermos and her cardigan from the back of her chair, and she walked past him toward the elevator. She did not run. She did not look back. She pressed the button for the lobby and stood very straight while the doors closed, and then she let out the breath she had been holding since the moment she looked up and saw him standing there. She drove home, she fed Fig, she poured her wine, and she sat at her kitchen table. And she thought very carefully about what she was going to do. 3 days later, she was taken. It happened fast, the way bad things happened. Not with the slow dread of a nightmare, but with the sudden mechanical efficiency of something that had been planned. She had stayed again, later than she should have, chasing a thread in the Meridian numbers that kept pulling her forward. It was 9 in the evening when she finally shut everything down, and the parking structure was nearly empty, and she was thinking about Fig and whether she had remembered to leave him enough water. And then a hand closed around her arm from behind, and she didn't even have time to scream before something pressed against her face and the fluorescent lights of the parking level blurred into grey and then black. She woke up in a chair, and her wrists were zip-tied to the armrests. Her head throbbed. There was a smell of damp concrete and diesel fuel, and something metallic underneath it all that she recognized, distantly, as blood. She was in a warehouse of some kind. She could tell by the scale of the darkness above her, the quality of the echo, when someone moved. A single work light had been positioned to shine directly into her face, which meant she could not see much beyond it. She could hear breathing. More than one person. "She's up." The voice was unfamiliar. Male. Not nervous, which was somehow worse than if he'd been nervous. Audrey said nothing. She breathed. She catalogued. Chair zip ties, concrete floor, warehouse, multiple individuals, work light. She was still in her work clothes. Her bag was gone. Her phone was gone. Her cardigan was still on. She had no idea why that detail mattered to her, but it did. "We know you saw the Meridian transfers," said a different voice. This one was closer. A man stepped into the edge of the light, middle-aged, expensive haircut that had grown out slightly, the kind of face that had once been handsome and was now just hard. "We need to know what you told Varga." "I didn't tell Mr. Varga anything," Audrey said. "That's not what our source says." "Then your source is wrong." There was a pause, and then something connected with her cheekbone, sharp and bright, and the world tilted sideways for a moment before settling reluctantly back into place. She did not cry out. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose and focused on a point in the middle distance and reminded herself very firmly, that crying would not help and that the pain was just information. "Let's try again," the man said. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Audrey said. Her voice was impressively steady. She was distantly proud of it. "I found irregularities in the Meridian account. I didn't report them because I didn't know who to report them to safely. I have been sitting on this information for 3 weeks, trying to figure out my next move, and I haven't made one yet. That is the complete truth. Who else knows?" "No. One. Prove it." "I can't prove a negative," she said. "But I can tell you that if I had told anyone, I wouldn't be sitting at my desk alone at 9 o'clock at night. I would be long gone." Another silence. Longer this time. She could feel that her cheek was swelling. The zip ties were cutting into her wrists. She ran a slow internal inventory. No broken teeth, no vision issues, breathing normal, no signs of a concussion beyond the initial dizziness from whatever they had used to knock her out. She was intact. She intended to stay that way. "She knows more than she's saying," said the first voice from somewhere behind her. "Obviously," said the man with the hard face. "The question is whether she's told it to anyone. She works for him. You think she just—" "I think," the man said, "that we have a problem, and that problem has brown eyes and very inconvenient accounting skills. Somewhere, far away, farther than it should have been possible to hear." Something exploded. Emilio Varga got the call at 9:47. He was in the back of his car reviewing documents, the Chicago skyline moving past the window in a slow glitter of lights. His phone rang. He looked at the number. He picked up. "Talk." The voice on the other end talked. It was very brief. It contained exactly 2 pieces of information. Audrey Sloan had been taken from the Vega Holdings parking structure approximately 40 minutes ago, and the individuals responsible were almost certainly connected to the Meridian account. Emilio did not say anything for a moment. The documents in his hand were quarterly projections, revenue forecasts, the kind of paper that meant nothing to him except as a measure of how well the operation was running. He had been in this business for 20 years. He had seen things that would have broken most men. He had never, in 20 years, felt his hands go still in quite the way they went still now. "Where?" he said. It took his people 18 minutes to locate the warehouse. It was on the south side, near the rail yards, a building that had cycled through 3 different shell corporations in the past decade and was, on paper, being used for climate-controlled storage. Emilio did not wait in the car. He went in through the north entrance with 4 men, and he moved through the building in a silence that was, to those who knew him, far more frightening than any noise he might have made. He had a particular quality in moments of extreme focus, a stillness, a compression of self, as though everything extraneous had been stripped away, and what remained was pure, cold intent. He heard her voice before he saw her. It was coming from behind a bank of metal shelving near the center of the warehouse, and it was doing something he had not expected. It was calm, not the desperate calm of someone performing steadiness they didn't feel, but the real thing, measured, careful, conserving energy. He stopped outside the light's perimeter. She was tied to a chair. Her face was turned partly toward him and partly away, and even in the bad light he could see the swelling at her cheekbone, the dark mark blossoming there, her wrists raw against the plastic of the zip ties. Her cardigan had one sleeve partially torn at the shoulder. Something happened in Emilio Varga's chest. He had seen a great deal of violence in his life. He had, on occasion, been the instrument of it. It had never affected him the way this affected him. This woman who had sat behind a wall of filing cabinets for 3 years, and never asked for anything, and never caused trouble, and never once, in all that time, failed to get her numbers right. Who had found the Meridian irregularities 6 weeks before his own people had flagged them, and had said nothing, and had quietly, methodically verified her findings until she was certain. Who was sitting in a warehouse with a bruised face, tied to a chair, and somehow still sounded like the most competent person in the room. He stepped forward. He took the first man before anyone knew he was there. The second turned and was handled before he finished turning. The third had a weapon drawn, and it didn't matter. The man with the hard face. Emilio recognized him now, a former mid-level account manager named Preston Burke, who had been let go 8 months ago for reasons that were becoming increasingly clear, backed against the far wall with his hands up. "Varga." "Don't," Emilio said. His voice had not changed. It was still unhurried. That was, somehow, the most frightening thing about it. He crossed to Audrey in 4 steps. He crouched down in front of her, and he pulled a folding knife from his jacket pocket and he cut the zip ties, carefully one at a time, and he did not look away from her face while he did it. She looked back at him. Her right cheek was badly bruised. There was a cut at the corner of her mouth that had stopped bleeding. Her wrists were red and abraded where the plastic had been. Her hair had come half down from whatever she'd had it pinned in, and she was pushing 30 years old, and she was sitting in a warehouse in the south side of Chicago, and she was looking at him with those very precise, very steady brown eyes like she was taking inventory. "Miss Sloane," he said. "Mr. Varga," she said, "are you injured beyond what I can see?" She considered this with the same methodical care she applied to everything. "I don't think so." They were more interested in information than in damage. This, she moved her jaw experimentally, was persuasion, not punishment. "You're certain?" "I was a pre-med student for 2 years before I switched to accounting," she said. "I know what a concussion feels like. I don't have one." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he stood and he turned, and he looked at Preston Burke standing against the wall, with his hands still raised, and whatever was in Emilio's expression made the man's face go the color of old ash. "Please," Burke said. "I can explain." "You took something that belongs to me," Emilio said. His voice was so quiet that Audrey almost didn't hear it from 4 feet away. "She's a bookkeeper," Burke said. "She's nobody." "She," Emilio said, "is mine." They drove in silence for several minutes before Audrey spoke. She was in the back of his car, which was large and very clean, and smelled of leather, and something faintly expensive that she couldn't identify. Someone had brought her a first aid kit. She suspected the driver had produced it from the glove compartment without being asked. And she had pressed a cold pack to her cheek and was working through the abrasions on her wrists with a practiced efficiency that she suspected was making the men in the front seat slightly uncomfortable. "He was skimming from the Meridian transfers," she said. Emilio was looking out his window at the city. "Preston Burke. He was your account manager for the Meridian relationship until 8 months ago. He left before I could complete my analysis, which is part of why I wasn't certain. But the structure of the diversion is consistent with someone who had inside knowledge of the thresholds your compliance team was monitoring." She paused. "He'd been routing the excess through a holding entity in Delaware. The company was incorporated 3 weeks before the first anomalous transfer." A beat of silence. "How long have you known this suspected?" 6 weeks. "Confirmed. 3 days ago, approximately 90 minutes before you found me at my desk." Another silence. Longer. "You stayed to verify it." "I don't report things I'm not certain of." He turned his head and looked at her then. Really looked at her. The full weight of that grey gaze, not the brief assessment she had always received before. She had spent 3 years trying to be invisible. And right now, with her bruised face and her ruined wrists and her hair falling down around her shoulders, she felt more seen than she had in years, and she did not know what to do with that. "Why didn't you come to me when you first suspected?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Because I didn't know if you were the problem." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. She wasn't sure this man did smiles, exactly, but it was something. "And now? Now I know." Burke was operating independently. The Meridian diversions weren't sanctioned. "He was stealing from you." She looked down at the cold pack she was pressing to her cheek. That makes you the victim of the same scheme I uncovered? Which changes the calculus considerably. The calculus, he repeated. Whether coming to you is dangerous. Mathematically, right now, you are the safest person I know. He was quiet for a long moment. The city moved past outside, the lights fragmenting across the windows, and Audrey sat with her ruined wrists and her cold pack, and the particular exhausted clarity that came after extreme adrenaline, and she thought about Fig, who would be hungry, and about her wine, which she had not gotten to drink, and about the way Emilio Varga had crouched in front of her in that warehouse and cut the ties off her wrists, like he had all the time in the world. Like nothing else mattered until her hands were free. You should have come to me sooner, he said finally. His voice had something in it she couldn't name. Probably, she agreed. In hindsight, the filing cabinet wall wasn't as secure a hiding place as I'd assumed. This time, the corner of his mouth moved further. You knew about the filing cabinets. I chose the desk specifically. Sight lines are much better behind them than they look. I could see the whole floor. She paused. And I could hear the conference room through the ventilation duct in the corner. He looked at her. She looked back. I've heard things I absolutely should not have heard, she said very carefully. I want you to know that I filed all of it in the same place I filed the Meridian suspicions. I am extremely good at not reporting things until I'm certain they need to be reported. Is that a declaration of loyalty or a negotiation? She thought about it. Both. She did not go back to her apartment that night. Emilio installed her in a guest suite on the 14th floor of a building she later learned he owned outright, with a view of the lake and a bathroom the size of her entire kitchen and a change of clothes that appeared. She did not ask how. In the correct size, folded on the bed, someone retrieved Fig from her apartment. She found him in the morning, asleep on the foot of the bed, looking entirely unconcerned by the relocation, because Fig had always been adaptable in ways that Audrey envied. She slept for 9 hours. She woke up and showered and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. The bruise on her cheek had gone spectacular colors overnight, deep purple shading to greenish yellow at the edges, a canvas of impact she inspected with the detached interest of someone reading a document. The cut at the corner of her mouth was already closing. Her wrists were wrapped in bandages that were clean and professional and had definitely not been applied by herself, which meant someone had come in while she was sleeping. She thought about that. She thought about Emilio Varga crouching in front of her with a folding knife, cutting her free with careful hands. She pulled on the clothes, dark trousers, a soft grey sweater, both of which fit in the way that things only fit when someone had paid attention rather than guessed. And she went out into the living room and found breakfast on the table, and Emilio Varga sitting at the other end of it with a coffee and a folder of documents. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her face. At the bruise, something moved through his expression, fast and controlled, but she had gotten very good at reading the seams where things were forced into shapes they didn't naturally hold. He was angry, not at her. At what had been done to her, she sat down across from him. The Delaware entity has been identified and flagged, he said. Her Bookke's access to any Vega adjacent assets has been permanently revoked. And Bookke himself. A pause. That's not your concern. She picked up her coffee. You're right, it isn't. She drank. It was very good coffee. I'd like to go back to my desk today. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. The Meridian file still needs to be closed out properly, she said, and the Q4 projections are due Friday. I assume you still need those. You were abducted from the parking structure 12 hours ago. I'm aware. The bruising is a constant reminder. She set down her coffee. I'm not fragile, Mr. Varga. I'm very difficult to break. This was an attempt to frighten me into either talking or disappearing. And I didn't talk, and I'm not disappearing. And the most useful thing I can do right now is go back to being exactly where I've always been. He studied her. She studied him back. "You've been hiding behind filing cabinets for 3 years," he said slowly. "Watching everything, recording everything, and never once giving me any reason to look at you twice. That was the goal. Why?" She was quiet for a moment. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Because I know what I look like, and I know what this world looks like. And women who look like me don't get taken seriously in rooms like the ones on the 19th floor. We get overlooked. So I used that. I made myself as invisible as possible, and I did my job better than anyone, and I figured that was enough to keep me safe." She looked up at him. It almost worked. The silence between them was different from the silences before, quieter and more inhabited. "You are not invisible," Emilio said. She looked at him. "You have never been invisible to me," he said. "Not once. Not from the first day." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I knew about the filing cabinets," he said. "I approved that desk placement. 3 years ago when you were hired, I reviewed your file. Your qualifications were extraordinary for the position." He paused. "I wanted to know why someone like you was applying for a mid-level accounting role at a holdings company. What conclusion did you reach? That you were either running from something or hiding something, and that either way it would be useful to keep you close." He set down his cup. "I have been watching you for 3 years, Miss Sloane. I have read every report you've produced. I know you arrive at 7:45 and leave at 5:59 and eat at your desk and bring your own coffee." He held her gaze. "You were never invisible. You were the most interesting person in the building." Audrey stared at him. She thought about 3 years of careful invisibility. 3 years of small lunches and quiet shoes, and the cardigan she wore like armor. 3 years of feeling unseen. "You could have said something," she managed. "You would have run." She thought about it. "Yes," she admitted. "Probably. So I waited." Something shifted in his expression. That same quality of light-changing angle that she had seen in her office 3 nights ago. "I am, at my core, a patient man." She looked at him across the breakfast table, at the coffee cup and the folder of documents and the particular quality of his stillness, and she felt something shift in her own chest. Not dramatically, not in the romantic novel way she might have imagined, but quietly, like a door she had locked a long time ago, turning on a hinge that was smoother than expected. "I want a raise," she said. He blinked. It was the first genuinely startled thing she had seen him do. "I've been significantly underpaid relative to the actual scope and sensitivity of my work," she said. "And I've recently had my personal safety compromised in a way that I think changes the terms of my employment somewhat." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was brief and quiet and completely unguarded, and it transformed his face in a way that she thought probably very few people had ever seen. "Done," he said. She went back to her desk. She closed out the Meridian file. She submitted the Q4 projections. She found 2 more irregularities in the accounts from Burke's tenure. Smaller ones. Almost certainly his testing of the waters before he'd committed to the larger scheme. And she documented them with her usual precision and sent them up to the 19th floor in a clean, cross-referenced report. She brought her own coffee. She kept her cardigan. She stopped hiding behind the filing cabinets. It was a small change. She moved her monitor so it faced the room rather than the wall, and she raised her chair 2 inches, and she began taking her lunch occasionally in the break room, sitting in the corner near the window where the light was good, and she could read without straining. She nodded to colleagues she had spent 3 years pretending not to see. She learned, slowly, that several of them had been trying to figure out who she was for months. "We thought you might be like a secret inspector," said the woman from billing whose name was Clarissa, and who had, Audrey discovered, an absolutely devastating dry wit, like upper management sent down in disguise. "Close," Audrey said, which was truer than Clarissa would ever know. She saw Emilio in the hallways now. She didn't know if she was imagining it, or if he walked past her floor more often than before, he always stopped for a moment. He always looked at her. He had a way of looking that was entirely different from every other look she had spent 3 years trying to avoid. It wasn't assessment, wasn't dismissal, wasn't slide off and away of eyes that didn't find what they were looking for. It was the look of someone who had been patient for a long time and had decided, finally, that the waiting was over. 6 weeks after the warehouse, he knocked on the frame of her cubicle at 6:15 in the evening when the floor was empty. "Dinner," he said. She saved her work. She shut down her terminal. She got her bag. She walked out from behind the filing cabinets and into the corridor, and she stood next to him in the elevator, and she did not try to be invisible. And she did not try to be invisible. And she was still wearing the cardigan. She thought she always might be. It was warm, and she liked it, and it had nothing to do with hiding. "You know," she said as the elevator descended, "I found another discrepancy in the Bookke ledgers this afternoon. A smaller one. I think he tested the system at least twice before he committed to the meridian structure." "I know," Emilio said. "I read your report. I added a recommendation for a systematic audit of any accounts he had signatory access to between 2021 and 2023. I approved it this morning." She looked at him. "You didn't tell me. I wanted to see if you'd find it yourself." She stared at him. "You approved an audit framework I hadn't submitted yet. I approved it preemptively, based on the pattern. I thought you'd reach the same conclusion." He looked back at her. "I was right." The elevator doors opened on the lobby. Audrey Sloane stepped out into the marble-floored atrium of Vega Holdings and thought about 3 years of believing she was invisible, and about a man who had apparently been watching her with full attention the entire time, and about the particular satisfaction of being correctly anticipated by someone who was paying close enough attention to do it. She thought about numbers that didn't lie, and about the seams where things were forced into shapes they didn't naturally hold, and about how she had spent 3 years forcing herself into the shape of someone small and quiet and forgettable. She was none of those things. She had just been waiting, she realized, for a room where it was safe to be what she actually was. Outside, the Chicago evening was cold and clear, the lake wind coming off the water with its familiar bite, and Emilio Varga held the door and she walked through it, and for the first time in 3 years, Audrey Sloane did not make herself small as she crossed the threshold. She walked out into the night, like she owned the exact amount of space she took up. She did.